Testing on Prisoners, Morally Correct or Corrupt by Kira Floyd and Skylar Watchers.
The Nuremberg Code of 1947 says that the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. And this code was a direct response to the Nazi medical experiments. So from the 1940s to the early 1970s, American doctors regularly injected and infected inmates with malaria, typhoid fever, herpes, cancer cells, tuberculosis, ringworm, hepatitis, syphilis, and cholera in repeatedly failed attempts to cure these diseases. It was very covered up in the public, and they made it seem more harmless than it really was. In the 1970s, more than 90% of testing was done on prisoners with and without their consent. Some were paid $2 to $3 for lending their body to science, and many have died, and the ones that are still alive are in very poor health.
Go. After the National Commission's of 1976 report, medical research in prison was reduced. The civil rights movement played a key role in diminishing the use of prisoners as medical studies. This was all brought to the public's awareness a few years ago when the government made an apology for federal doctors infecting prisoners and mental patients in Guatemala with syphilis 65 years ago. This was the discovery to what was happening in the USA as well.
So here are some examples of the research that happened. There were some very noted researchers that were involved in the studies, including Jonas Salk, who is famous for kind of discovering the polio vaccine. Joseph Goldberger figured out that pellagra was actually due to poor diet by changing the diet of federal prisoners to see how this terrible and painful condition affected them. In one study in Brooklyn in the early 1960s, there were volunteers in the prison, but they didn't know that they were being injected with cancer cells.
At a prison in Philadelphia in the 1960s was told that he would be testing a new bubble bath. They removed a layer from his skin back and they put on very painful chemicals. The doctor of prisoners infected flash burns to approximate the results of atomic bombs attacks and conducted various mind control experiments using high doses of LSD provided by the CIA.
Here are some pictures of some of the research that was done. In the top picture, you can see where they had put various things on his back to see how it would affect the skin. In the bottom left, they're injecting different products, I guess you could say, into their bloodstreams. And then the bottom right, they are taking pills to see how it affects the body.
So why prisoners? The demand for profitability lifestyle drugs has created a greater demand for testing and safety and efficiency on such medications, which requires more research subjects. Prisoners are a controlled population that creates a very large and profitable testing pool for future medical researchers such as drug companies. Currently, privately funded researchers can be conducted behind prison walls in relative obscurity, as such studies are not subject to governmental regulations. People believe this is prisoners repaying their debt to society.
So here are kind of the effects that prisoner testing has. Dun, dun, dun. Exactly. So first, historical. Testing of prisoners has the potential to either scare or inspire future generations. So the same way Nazis' experiments influenced American researchers, later generations could be influenced by ours as well. A moral effect would be that when something as dehumanizing as prisoner testing is occurring, our morals are put to the test. And if this becomes more prevalent, we become numb to it and allow it to become the norm. A psychological effect, going through these tests not only has physical effects on the prisoners, but psychological as well. They often go through intense amounts of pain that can leave lasting impressions like post-traumatic stress.
Society. The society is not fully informed of the terrible events that occur to the prisoners. They are only glossed over with slight information that mostly focuses on the positive side of testing. This makes most of their opinions on testing on prisoners acceptable because they don't all realize the terrible negative effects on these poor human beings. Political reflects the society because when the public finds out information that is upsetting or discouraging to the public eye, the government then has to step up and make a public announcement or statement apologizing and backing up their reasons for their actions.
Sides to the argument. Some people say that it is acceptable to test on prisoners because sometimes it can have a positive outcome and leads to a discovery or cure. And also, they believe that the prisoners kind of deserve it since they're in there for a reason, and especially if they're receiving the death penalty and they'll kind of die anyways. Some also say that it's not acceptable because it's cruel and against our right as human beings.
What do you think? Should scientists be free to pursue their investigations regardless of the potential risk? Yes, if they are consent. Even with consent, volunteers must be informed to what they are being tested on and the risks that apply. If there is a cure, they should also be guaranteed to be given it. Should they publicize every discovery they make? Yes, they should always publicize it. If a test turns out negatively and many are injured or harmed, although it will frighten people, the public should be aware.
These are some things you should consider yourself. If the prisoner dies because of their wrongdoings, it is reasonable. But if they die due to a science experiment, doesn't that just turn us into Hitler? Many people disagree with animal testing, so what makes it right to do it on a prisoner? They're human too. Even though they did do something wrong, it doesn't make it okay unless they're volunteering or doing it for money. Is this them repaying their debt to society, or does it infringe on our human rights?
Stay in school, kids.
How not to plagiarize 101.
How not to plagiarize 102.